haven't thought about this movie for a little while, even though it's a movie I love.
Yeah.
But Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World is a great movie.
2003.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a great film. I feel like it's been forgotten. Directed by Peter Weir, the great Australian director, and his output has not been terribly prolific, but what he has made has been generally very memorable.
Yeah, well, so obviously started way back almost 50 years ago. Picnic at Hanging Rock is probably the first movie that really caught attention from people. Fantastic movie. If anybody hasn't seen it, I recommend that movie right away.
On Criterion, yeah.
Great movie. Very, very impressive. I think they did an Amazon show based on that same story recently as well.
Was it Amazon or Hulu? Maybe it was Amazon. Yeah, I can't remember.
I didn't
it was
see
like
it.
it was a series of some kind. Yeah.
I didn't see it, but I thought that the movie that he made was great. Then, of course, made the move as many directors do to the United States, and very successful career, particularly with Witness being a highlight. But Gallipoli was another one he made right before he came over here in Australia, still with a young Mel Gibson. But this movie probably is the biggest production he's ever had. If you think about his work, he's not by any means a director that I think has been without notice, but he's never really been a director that's probably gone with a ton of massive budgets behind him. This one's a big one for him, but he delivered splendidly with this very rousing film from 2003 that sadly just got engulfed by The Lord of the Rings at the time, which came out probably the final installment came out about a month later.
Yeah, it got quite a few Oscar nominations. I think it won cinematography and
Sound editing.
mixing or sound editing.
Yep.
It's one I've gone back to quite a few times, and it's one that really begs for a sequel that has seemingly been rumored, but it doesn't seem like it's ever going to happen, really. It's based on a series of books that's very well
Patrick
known.
O'Brien, the Aubrey Maturin novels, and the first title is Master and Commander, and then book number 10, from which this gets most of its plot, is The Far Side of the World. They made some changes, which were probably smart changes, in that the novel is set during the War of 1812, so it's actually Aubrey versus an American frigate, and this one they switched it around and had it during the Napoleonic era, which, considering that this came out right after 9/11, I don't know that American audiences would have been interested in having a movie where the heroes are attacking an American ship, and would have been hard, I think, for audiences to swallow back then.
Yeah, probably. But the change in time, I think, works very well here. So the general premise is the HMS Surprise is the main ship here, commanded by Captain Aubrey, played by Russell Crowe. They're a British military ship dispatched to chase down a French man-of-war, basically, the Acheron. And it's pretty simple premise, right? You know, I mean, this is one ship against another. But this film is really all about the historical details, about the atmosphere, about the characters. And the opening of this film is absolutely extraordinary, I think. Some of the best sound design I can think of in a film.
And it's throughout the whole film. It's
Yeah,
not just
yeah,
that
it's not just
the
the
battle
opening, but-
scenes. Those
yeah.
battle scenes, I think, are the most show-offy part of the sound design, because
Yeah.
you get all the cannonballs ripping through and everything falling apart. But throughout the whole film, I mean, they have to have layers upon layers of sound design to make you think you're actually on an ancient vessel.
And you
right?
feel like you're there. I mean, it feels very realistic. And the opening has almost a Saving Private Ryan quality to it. I mean, it's not meant to be shocking on that level, but I do remember very distinctly the first time I saw this was in the theater, just how harrowing that scene was. And you hear about ships shooting each other with cannonballs and seafaring battles and this and that, and it all seems kind of cartoonish. But when you actually see it play out here, it's absolutely terrifying, and it really puts you right back in those times, and it makes you feel what these men must have felt like.
When I was watching this again, I was thinking to myself the entire time, this movie could not possibly be made this way today.
I feel like we say that a lot when we talk about movies.
This one is especially obvious, though, and
Yeah.
for a number of different levels. The first is that right when it got made was the perfect time for it to get made, because the technology was there in terms of the special effects to really pull off naval warfare in a very realistic looking way, and to still be required to mix it in with actual real sets. Now so much of it would be more CGI than it would have been back then.
It does feel very practical.
And so, but you had some, like I know one of the things they famously did is they mixed in the waters from the actual Galapagos Islands that would then match the color of the water where they are shooting on the set. So they small, subtle little things like that. And then they also were at a point where it's PG-13, but this would not be a PG-13 if it came out here today. I'm pretty sure this movie would be rated R today, or very close to it. I mean, they probably would have to cut some of the violence down.
It's fairly violent, yeah.
But even just like, not the fact that it's just violent and they show actual blood, but I mean, the fact that you actually have kids, which historically is accurate. But the opening scene, you have a child in the battle after the aftermath having his arm amputated. It doesn't flinch in showing you that reality. Plus, you also have, in terms of its just depiction of camaraderie, right? I mean, it's not glorifying war, it's not glorifying the military, but it is thematically really showing the importance of service, duty. It's not trying to look at things from a 21st century perspective.
Yeah.
And I think any movie made today would really try to hammer home our morals, our ideals of the early 21st century. This film really is, I think, interested in transporting you back to the very early 1800s and showing you that world and the men of that world. And every little detail about it works together to accomplish that goal, which I don't think any director making this movie today or any studio producing this movie today would have that goal in mind.
Yeah, it does. It feels like a very singular entity, right? That they have a very clear vision for this film. And you mentioned the camaraderie. That element really shines through beautifully throughout this film. Russell Crowe and the relationship with his crew, especially those dinner scenes where they're singing and they're clearly drunk at times, and they act like children a lot of times. There's really this childlike excitement that they have for what they're doing that shines through at times that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Russell Crowe's character, he really has kind of these boyish moments where he's reminiscing about his time as a boy serving on a ship like this, and you can tell that this has been his whole life, right? And he takes the boys on his ship kind of under his wing because he knows that he was one of them at one point. But at the same time, he's very serious and he's very dedicated and he's very capable.
You there! Stand fast! Master at arms, take that man below and clap him in irons.
Aye, sir.
Mr. Pullings, defaulters at 8 bells.
Aye, sir.
Well, it's, of course, at the heart of this film is the relationship between Jack and Stephen Maturin, played by Paul Bettany, who is
the doctor.
A physician as well as a naturalist. The film, I know for people who really like the books, I haven't read all the books, I've read a few of them. He's a spy in the books as well. Not a spy against the British, but a spy for the British. And so they cut that out of this film, probably smartly, because I think it'd be just adding too much to the plot.
It'd be too convoluted.
But I think that his being there is wonderful because while he appreciates what they're doing and he understands the importance of what they're doing, he isn't himself a part of what they're doing, like a military man, right?
What would you have me do, Stephen?
Tip the ship's grog over the side.
Stop their grog.
Nagel was drunk when he insulted Holland. Did you know that?
Stop 200 years of privilege and tradition. I'd rather have them 3 sheets to the wind on occasion than have a mutiny on my hands.
You see, I'm rather understanding of mutinies. Men pressed from their homes, their chosen occupations, confined for months aboard a wooden prison.
Stephen, I profoundly respect your right to disagree with me here in this cabin, but I can only afford one rebel on this ship.
I think it's also smart that they didn't try to start at the beginning, which you probably would normally do. I think that's even what they wanted to do initially when they pitched the idea to Peter Weir.
Yeah.
Was that it would start with just Aubrey getting his ship and being able to set out for the first time. And I like that this film starts with them already out, with them already having a history and already having a friendship. And you don't have that sort of origin story.
It feels like, yeah, it's very much an established world. It doesn't feel like the first film in that we're seeing these characters, right? It almost feels like a sequel already, and not in a bad way. I mean, it's not a criticism toward it.
It stands on its own. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
perfectly coherent, contained story.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you get the sense that really you're plopping into a story that's already in progress. You're pulling out before the story is really resolved.
Exactly.
Because the friendship will continue on, right? It's already in existence. It'll continue on afterwards. The lives of these sailors will continue on. And
Yeah. I want to go back to some of the visual effects in this film. You know, I mean, you mentioned the practical effects and the practical sets, which are really extraordinary. But the use of, were they using miniatures in this? I mean,
no, not miniatures. They actually had a frigate that they bought. That was a full, completely reconstructed model to scale, 1-to-1 scale of the HMS Rose. That's what they used and actually sailed out on the sea. And then they, from that, built different sets that they then shot in studio on the gimbal, right? So that they're able to move it around, do different things with it. So I don't think they had a single miniature in this entire film.
okay. I could have sworn they used miniatures at times. Maybe I'm just remembering wrong. But there's a wonderful blending, right, of practical and digital effects here. And again, I feel like there's no other film that has depicted, you know, seafaring battles in such a realistic way. I bring up Saving Private Ryan again. I mean, to me, it's kind of an analog to that film insofar as bringing this kind of naval warfare to a new level of realism.
You know, there's the old saying that the best special effect is the special effect you don't know.
Well,
And this is
I
what
guess
this
that's
gets
what I'm
at.
trying to say is that I feel like the effects are so transparent here. I have a hard time telling what's real and what isn't, and that's a great testament, you know, to the work.
And I think a lot of that's from the film editing. It's, you know, not that I think the Oscars really matter that much, but there are times you go like, this thing really should have gotten an Oscar, right? This movie should have won the film editing Oscar. It just is very difficult to edit on a kind of a contained set like this. I mean, you really don't have anywhere else to go. You're on this boat. They don't really, I mean, they go out to the Galapagos Islands for a little bit, but they're on the boat and they still make it interesting. You get a sense of space, where things are in relation to other. Even when they get onto the Acheron at the end of it, you can tell that's a different boat. You know, it can be easily confused. I don't know where anything is. And so I really think the editing here is a part of that. I mean, that's where a lot of the special effects work so well. The visual effects, the digital stuff works so perfectly because your editing so wonderfully captures a lot of things within the camera itself and really helps you to just get swept up in the story.
I like the use of source music in this film too. I mean, there is original score here, but there's quite a bit of pre-existing music. Of course, the music that is played live on the ship at times, most memorably at the end of the film. But the
Boccherini piece.
Yeah, the Boccherini and the variation on a theme by Thomas Tallis. That one of my favorite string pieces, just a beautiful theme that comes into play here. But another thing I really like about
that
this film,
scene, sorry to interrupt, but just that scene where they employ that music from Vaughan Williams is just one of the most inspired uses of classical music in a film. It feels like it belonged. It was composed just for that scene to capture the emotion of what was going on and the fact that Aubrey rightly makes the call, you have to cut it because the sail is acting as an anchor, but it means killing the man that's overboard by letting go of it and having to order his friend to cut. It's just amazing how that scene works, and the music could not. I don't think you could possibly compose a better piece of music for it.
Yeah, I think they just kind of surrendered and used the source piece, right? Because it works so beautifully. But I do love how this film focuses on the men below decks as well, right? It's not just about the officers. It's not just about the higher, command individuals. It's about the men down manning the cannons, and it focuses very much on those more common sailors to great effect. But it's
one of the things about that with just the other the crew as a whole. Great casting decisions there. One of the things Peter were talked about was after the fall of the Soviet Union, when he was watching TV interviews from people from behind the Iron Curtain, he noticed that they didn't have the same kind of natural way we kind of respond to a camera, where you kind of just naturally kind of play to it a little bit, smile a little, kind of perk up a little bit. And he thought that's the perfect kind of person to have be your crew. And so they actually hired about a dozen Poles who just never really had exposure to it. And then they went and dug out people from around America and throughout other parts of the world that could have that kind of flat sort of, I'm just working kind of look. And I
kind
think
of the soulless, worker bee.
but
sort
with
of
distinct
affect,
with
yeah.
distinct features, with a real sense of like I've been working hard. I mean, because you don't want to have a bunch of pretty Hollywood extras who are trying to all become future movie stars. As your crew here, right? That you're not going to believe that. So one of the things that could make or break a movie like this is just those. I mean, you need your main cast to be great, and some of those more principal supporting characters, but you really need your crew to be believable. If you don't believe this is actually a crew, it's going to undercut a lot of the authenticity they're going for. So just the fact that they don't have any bad extra syndrome going on here, really, I think what seals a lot of the film, and is part of what you're getting at about how it can effectively go below deck as well as above deck.
Yeah. And the below decks characters do perpetuate some of the fears of the rest of the crew, or they kind of manifest the fears of the rest of the crew in an interesting way. So
the superstitions, and all those different things that come up.
the Jonah part of the film, right, where they're stuck without any wind, and
Mr. Hullum is
Mr.
the
Hullum.
cause of it all, right?
Great performance by that actor. I should know the actor's name, but
it's a truly sad, because you right away get the sense he's just not sure of himself.
yeah,
And
he lacks that confidence, even though he is an officer.
He's got the
and
skill.
He's trying to build it, but for some reason the men just don't respect him.
I've tried to get to know the men, sir, and be friendly, but they've taken a set against me. Always whispering when I go past and giving me looks.
And there's kind of this extrasensory perception going on, or something that no one can quite put a finger on, and even Captain Aubrey is aware of it. Like, this is kind of a seafaring phenomenon, right? This idea of a Jonah.
Well, I think it's in every kind of corporation, right? There's just people
Any
who,
kind of
for whatever, they
discipline
can't
with
quite
hierarchy.
manage
Yeah.
people, and you don't know why, and he's that, and
They don't inspire confidence for some reason.
and this is all his life is, and so you see him becoming more and more broken down by it, and you get really invested not just in the main leads, but in all these other characters.
And
Great.
I love how the film takes the time to develop those little side stories, because I think a lot of films today would just kind of cut that, right? They would see that as not essential to the story. And it is a fairly long film, but it doesn't feel overly long.
It's funny because I remembered it longer. It's only 138 minutes.
Yeah.
And I honestly thought of it as being at least 2.5 hours. And I go, for 138 minutes, they do a lot. It's not short,
They do, yeah.
but it's not, there's no wasted time.
But it has a very epic feel to it. It has a very expansive feel to it. It definitely feels like a saga in many ways. and it takes the time to explore those side characters. And again, it's all about fleshing out this world, right? Creating
Well-
this believable environment.
And what's maybe so different about this film versus, because obviously a lot of big movies today are at least 2.5 hours long, but it's almost like story and then stop, action, and then story and then action, right?
Or exposition, action, exposition, action.
That might be more accurate, yes. But this stuff doesn't stop just because a battle now emerges,
Yeah.
right? You're learning about characters. You're seeing the brilliance of Aubrey as a tactician, right? The way he's clearly outgunned. He is in a weak position the entire film, and then figuring out little strategies of how it is he can try to outmaneuver the French. The creating the fake back of the boat, right?
Yeah.
So that they think that they're going to be at one location when actually they're someplace else. And you're just,
Brilliant tactics like that, yeah.
you know, so it becomes a suspenseful piece and becomes an exciting piece of the film, but it's also telling you something about your character.
Well, and also the element of the doctor being a naturalist, right, and collecting these specimens from the Galapagos. And Aubrey gets the idea to disguise the ship from the phasmid, from the bug that looks like a stick, right? So there's this integration of, you know, this quality of his friend, his interest in naturalism that he was criticizing and even trying to suppress at times, is giving him the strategy they need to actually be victorious. So that's a neat little piece of writing, I think.
Well, and just the fact that, for example, that whole, because you said you could easily get rid of some of these things, I think a lesser film would. You wouldn't necessarily take the time to go to the Galapagos Islands.
Yeah.
You might go there once, but they actually go
They go
back.
there twice, yeah, exactly.
Right? And you think, well, what's the point of that? It seems repetitive. And the second time, you have this time just to really enjoy Maturin's exploration and his working with Mr. Blakeney, the little boy, right? And getting him to start to appreciate things, right? But it all pays off. Like you said, later on, they take the idea of disguising themselves as whalers as opposed to being a military ship to lure in the French. You also get, but beyond just like plot payoff, you get thematic payoff because it gets back to, I think this film really being ultimately about the importance of duty and responsibility, the sense of serving something larger than yourselves. And Maturin realizing, there it is, like I see the French, now this, what was thought to be done, it's nope, there it's, and he's knowing he's gonna have to give up all of the things he's found, every of those discoveries.
That's one of my favorite moments in the film. I love when, you know, a moment in a film gives me goosebumps, and that's one of them, when he sees the Acheron in that bay, and the music during that part, and he just has this look on his face of just resignation, like, yeah, you know.
I know what I need to do.
I have a duty, even though I'm making these wonderful discoveries that will establish him as a great scientist for the rest of his life. He has to abandon that because of a sense of duty to something larger.
And realizing he could have maybe never reported it and never had anything come of it, right?
Yeah.
And so, but he does it because it's the right thing.
And that simple shot, that kind of backwards dolly away from all the animals as they're being let loose, I love that little bit too.
Yeah. And of course, this leads into then the final climactic battle, which we've kind of hinted at, right? But I love the scene where, and this is, I guess, you know, we haven't talked in great detail about the performances. Russell Crowe is very good in this film.
Yeah.
He's a really talented actor. You know, obviously, I think a little hit and miss in terms of his projects, but this is one where it really hits. And that scene where he gives the speech to the crew, and he's talking about, this ship is our home. This ship is England.
England is under threat of invasion. And though we be on the far side of the world, this ship is our home. This ship is England. So it's every hand to his rope or gun, quick's the word and sharp's the action.
Stirring. I mean, you talk about goosebumps. That gives me goosebumps when I listen to it. Just
Yeah.
the sense of dedication and devotion.
Well, it's basically a city on the water, right? I mean, that's what a ship is. It has, every part of it has to work in harmony to be successful. And that, yeah, you know, you mentioned if this was made today, yeah, there would be so many other things that they would feel that they would have to inject into this film, you know, a romance storyline or something else for different demographics to cling on to. And this has such a
Yeah, how do you get the Chinese box office numbers and all that? Yeah.
this has such a pure vision to it that makes it feel very unique. And it's a shame it's been kind of overshadowed and forgotten, but hopefully people will return to it because it deserves that.